Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that we all face. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. Okay, so Alan Pitchford joins us today. I've been looking forward to sitting down with him for a while now. We got our paths crossed last week, so we were actually going to be talking last week, and that didn't happen. But so I'm glad he's here today. A little bit about Alan. He has been married for 16 years, and he's got 4 children, ages 1, 5, 8, and 12. He has a Bible and Media Arts degree from Freed-Hardeman and a Master's of Divinity from Harding School of Theology. And he served 15 years as the youth minister at East Ridge Church of Christ here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And he has since then transitioned into the role of involvement minister. And that's where he focuses on the young adults and young families. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Craig. Honored to be on.
Yeah, so right before we started, you mentioned about the conversation that we had in Lowe's or Home Depot a few months back, and that was like its own little podcast in the aisleway of Lowe's, and so
nobody was listening. Though.
Nobody was listening, but it was a great conversation, and that's actually what I was like, man, we need to just transplant this and get this on the show, on the podcast. So really excited to have you sit down with us today, and we're going to cover some, I think, really good, relevant information, not only for us to talk about as members of the church and the things that we deal with, both of us in a ministerial capacity, but also for the church at large, for church leadership, for college students, for youth, kids. So we're going to kind of run the gamut on some of this stuff. So tell me how you've been doing.
Yeah, doing great. I've been looking forward to this. This is like, I love just, even if I knew nothing else other than the title of the podcast, The Lion, the Way, and the War, it just has my interest. I just finished reading Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe to my kids last week. So
okay.
If I inadvertently call your show The Lion, the Witch Way, and the Wardrobe or something like that, if I mess it all up, you'll know that's why. But yeah, I love the emphasis of each of those three and how, these conversations are, I think, very relevant to where the church is today, and getting the focus more on our faith being something that's lived, and it's also bringing in the battle aspect. I love the way that ends with the war. That's what we're in the midst of. So.
Yeah. So I wrote a book last year, 2022. It got released. Also, the title of the book is The Lion, the Way, and the War. To address that very topic, the battle that we are in. And also, definitely a shout out to C.S. Lewis with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And one of my all-time favorite authors, I would say. So for kids, and I can appreciate this. I don't have 4. I have 3, but yours are younger in age, and the busyness of being a husband and being a father and being a minister and juggling all of that, I can appreciate that. So how do you do it?
Yeah, it's a lot of bouncing.
It is.
That's what juggling is. It's this rhythm. You're bouncing, and it's just get used to it, I guess. But last night I was popping in and out of the gym where my family was to get on a ministry meeting, Zoom call in the parking lot where I could get signal, and it seems like you're always just bouncing between different worlds. But it's all, I like to try to see it all as moving in the same direction. You're trying to do different things, but I think one of the things that becomes very important is priorities. As things get very busy, priorities become more and more important because, you can lose things or lose sight of things that are important if you're too busy. But that's, we all make time. This is one thing I've learned about everybody. Everybody makes time for what they want to make time for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So no matter how busy I am, I don't want to use that as an excuse, and I don't want, to ever get to the point where I see people as being too busy to be present in their, in church life, because some of the most busy people out there, they're the ones that are volunteering the most in churches.
Right.
And you come to respect that people they make time for what they value. And it seems like no matter how busy somebody is, they make time for social media. They make time for news, politics, sports, whatever they're into, they make time for it. So try to keep that mindset toward it.
And that's a whole podcast, a separate podcast in and of itself. Just talking about the juggling of life, being a Christian for men. Obviously, as dads, we try to engage our kids as best we can. As a dad, my wife did a much better job at engaging, building relationships with our children. And I seem to kind of bounce back and forth to extremes of, trying to balance church life and family life. And every now and then I'd find that balance, but then as soon as I found it, I seem to slip away from it. So it still remains a challenge today. So I always like to talk to people about, especially those that are successful at it. How do you do it? Give me some pointers, give me some advice on that. How'd you meet your wife?
Yeah, we met down in, we went to Freed Hardeman, both of us did. We actually met down in Mobile on a Hurricane Katrina relief cleanup trip. We had been at Freed together for, a couple of years, but never crossed paths until we were, by chance, paired up on the same relief team back in 2005. So
okay, did you know she was at Freed before the Katrina?
I don't think we ever. I mean, we kind of knew of each other right before we went because of some mutual friends, but I don't think we ever really crossed paths until we got down there.
Okay, so a storm brought you together.
That's right. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. Okay, well, I've got a few questions. We're gonna deal with some topics here, and so I'm just gonna start out, jump right into this. This first one is, talking about the involvement ministry, because now you've transitioned into that, and that's an interesting thing for me to think about, because I grew up in a time where there was no such thing as an involvement minister. Sure. And more churches today, I think, are seeing the need for it, especially this demographic that we're dealing with is probably one of the most under-talked about demographics in churches. And from my perspective, really, they are one of the most important demographics of churches, because they represent the continuity of churches. Right. If we lose this demographic, and a lot of churches are, if we lose this young adult demographic, young families, the church is really going to struggle, I think, and just based on some statistics of what I'm seeing. So, talk a little bit about the recognition for that within your own congregational setting, and then maybe from a larger macro perspective, more and more churches are getting plugged into this, and maybe you have some insight into why that's happening now, why attention is finally, thankfully, beginning to shift to that demographic.
Yeah. So for me, this was kind of a journey of, as a youth minister for 15 years, of watching these kids that, here we were pouring several years of attention on as they, and I think rightfully so, as they grew in their, their faith and as teenagers, and then they would graduate from the youth program and they'd move on. And a lot of times what I would see from my perspective, which I was kind of distracted, here I'm like focusing on the youth program, but when these kids would come back, whether that was for one thing, you never knew when they were going to come back. It was kind of sporadic. They were in for a holiday, or you didn't know if they were going to be around for very much of the summer, whatever. But when they would come back, or when they finished up college and moved back, what would happen a lot of times is you would see them kind of wander in aimlessly and take their place. It's kind of sad to watch. I mean, it's just you see them take their place, and wherever they're going to sit during worship and kind of stand there and look around and connect with a few people that were friendly to them, whatever, and then they would just kind of be like, well, I guess that's it, and they'd wander out. And a lot of times, I mean, even though I think there were people that were saying, hey, let's go talk to, he's back home, let's go catch up with him, whatever, a lot of times, unfortunately, you would see those people, they would kind of go through that motion so many times before they just disappear, just fall through the cracks. They didn't find a place to connect. And as a youth minister, I felt like the only thing I really knew to do at the time was to say, hey, it would be cool to have you come go with us on a retreat or a youth event or whatever, get them plugged in. And some that was effective with, but some of them were like, I'm not really in the youth group anymore. Right. It's time to, be an adult and grow up. And I see both sides of that, but I feel like there was a need there. We went through a long period where there wasn't even a college or young adult class or anything targeting that demographic. And part of it was that whenever one was started, it was discouraging because maybe they would have a few for a few weeks, and then is kind of seasonal, and it would lose steam and people would disappear, and then the ones that were leading the class would just get kind of discouraged and they would stop doing it. So we went through some cycles of that, but I just, over the years, I became more and more convicted that this is not okay. We've got to do better. We've got to, at least do everything we can to try to help these that are coming back to find their place, to become an active part of the church, to have better opportunities to connect with each other, to kind of maintain some continuity with, their vibrant church
Right.
life they were afforded during their, youth group years on into adulthood. And it doesn't mean repeat youth group. It means, let's find what's next and make sure that they're not just drifting off.
Sure. Because the needs change as the kids, I mean, they grow up, they start their own families and stuff. And I think, I'm not sure why it takes somebody that has a vested interest, because, looking at this from a high altitude sort of level, I don't think most church members or church leaders understand the rift that happens when we have a whole segment that you've fostered, right? I mean, you've built relationships with these kids as part of the youth program. So this vested interest as a youth minister, or like in my setting as a college minister, I pour into these kids, you pour into these kids. And then after we're done with them, the church hasn't done a great job of having okay, here's the next step. It's waiting for you. Here's what to expect. This is going to be enriching. This is going to be fulfilling. And we've been waiting for you. We've been waiting for you to reach this age where now we can take, pass the baton kind of thing. And I mean, let's be honest about it. Once they leave a good youth program, they may or may not find a good campus ministry program. That's hit or miss. And if they happen to find a good campus ministry program where we take the baton from you and pour into and develop, and then, my job is now to pass them on to the role that you've now in. So, it oftentimes it takes a person who has that vested interest, who has seen them and they've poured into them, and they don't want them to fall through the cracks. Like it's been, that's been happening across the board. So, I'm thankful that there's people that understand that have poured in, that are thinking along the lines of, I don't want to lose this kid because I worked with them. I know that they're a good kid, and they deserve a chance for us to step up. So all of that basically to say, what is your thoughts on, like, what's changing that more churches are finally, it's not taking an individual like me or you to recognize this. More church leadership is beginning to see, oh, we need to do something about this group because we're losing them.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of that is reactionary to, church leaders watching their own kids fall through the cracks. I think that's part of it. Sadly, I think part of it is churches, every once in a while, you kind of have this awareness. You look back and go, whoa, wait a second. We don't have anybody that's between the ages of college and 35, 40 years old.
Yeah. Like,
where is that whole segment of, like, it makes people concerned when and I think rightfully so, whenever they see that gap. So then it's almost like, I mean, it's better late than never, but ideally we wouldn't get to that point where it's like there's an empty room, right, that used to be the young adults, classroom or whatever, and it's, hopefully there's proactive efforts to try to keep from getting to that point, but yeah, I think it's just churches trying to make sure that they have a future, that the future of their congregation is bright, and that we've seen so many churches around Chattanooga and all across the globe, I'm sure, that are going through the same experience of seeing churches shut down because, they just age out.
Yeah.
They haven't done a good job of replacing themselves and plugging in the next generation.
This is a relatively new, and when I say relatively new, I'm talking the last 50 years. So we're let's go back 5 decades ago, or 60 years, where I don't know the sociological reasons, but I do know that was just part of life back then. That when you came back from college, or you became a young adult, like, your place was at a church, at a local congregation. Like
Mm-hmm.
the young, the 25, 35-year-olds, they didn't even imagine a lifestyle that did not include church as part of, part of their,
Right.
their environment, so to speak. And that is the thing that's changed.
Oh yeah, it's
today.
no longer the default.
Right.
The default is not to be, part of the church. So.
Yeah. So what's going on?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can blame culture. I think there is a lot of cultural current that's pulling people, especially young people, away from faithfulness. I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. But I think there's some things I believe that the church is kind of up against when it comes to trying to retain that age, that demographic. It's for whatever reasons, we've gotten to the point where, especially younger people, they don't have as much preference for group interaction like they used to have. They prefer public interaction. Is like behind the screen is preferred.
Right.
It's just the more comfortable place for them. So that's a challenge, and that predates COVID. I mean, COVID maybe accelerated that, but it was definitely the trend before COVID too. Another cultural current, I think, is tolerance. And the church, I think in a lot of young people's eyes, the church is not done tolerance right in terms of how we've navigated some of those difficult conversations, how we've addressed difficult topics, how we've pushed back on culture. Not that it doesn't need to be pushed back on. I think even if you're a faithful young person, I think you agree that, this isn't right and we should be going in this direction and not that direction. But in terms of how we have those conversations and what the tone is, I think there's been some turnoff with a lot of our young people over how that's been navigated in the church. And you could say similar things about politics, like how the church has navigated the whole political narrative that goes on from cycle to cycle. And, I think what young people, and I say young people, I'm kind of including this spectrum of ages from, starting with teens, but growing into young adulthood. I think what the young adults need to see is a true kingdom movement, kingdom mindset that rises above the political fray, that rises above everything else that the world is obsessed with. And I think in a lot of cases, whether it's right or wrong, we can have the conversation. But I think in a lot of cases, the younger generations just don't feel like the church is nailing it on that.
So have we disenfranchised, and I say we, the church, has the church created a marginalized community all of a sudden that we weren't aware that we were creating, that now this age, and when I think of the group that you're dealing with now, I kind of, in my mind, I'm thinking anywhere from age, like post-college, like maybe 20, youngish 20 to 35, somewhere in that age. And we can shift that a little bit, whichever way, both ways maybe. But have we unknowingly created a marginalized community, to throw a term out there that's very popular today?
I mean, I imagine it does feel that way to a lot of people, part of this is if young people, if they're looking at each other saying, we both have similar sentiments about, the disconnect between what is relevant in our concept of the world and how faith interacts with the world and what we see happening on a church level, it kind of brings about some unfortunate separation, in terms of those people's integration into the church family and church life and the community and everything that's supposed to be a part of that. And maybe that's inevitable to some extent. I would think that, probably any generation of the past, there's probably some amount of that happens, from generation to generation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what I think is unfortunate, and again, maybe this is, I'm just looking at my generation, because that's all I've experienced.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it happen in our generation where it seems like one thing working against churches is that a lot of the younger generation, it seems like sometimes to them that the church is stuck in the past, trying to get back to the past, lamenting the fact that things aren't today the way they were back in the 80s or whatever decade you want to look back to.
Right.
And so there's kind of that, and that kind of alienates especially these people that weren't even alive in the 80s, let alone, aware of what things were like back then and wanting to get back to that. They're just wanting to see the kingdom grow in 2023.
And, I'm glad that you're bringing this up, because I think the immediate pushback from my generation and older is like, no, we're not going to change because we're going to give up doctrinal truth and values, and we're not going to be tolerant to the point that we jeopardize good doctrinal stance that the church needs to stand firm on.
Yeah.
And if you want proof of that, just look at the world right now. Just look at all the changes to the church. You've got a complete disintegration of what used to be absolute truths 20 years ago that are now, everything's up for grabs. So that's the immediate pushback, I think, from my generation.
Don't let go. Yeah.
Right. But, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, truth can remain truth. We can stay doctrinally sound to things, but we also, and again, I say we, I'm talking about my generation and older, need to have some cultural awareness. Generational awareness. Well,
Sure.
I guess I can throw cultural awareness in that too,
Right.
but generational awareness to where we understand I can't see things solely through my lens of my generation, of how we did things and the viewpoints that have been inculcated to me and my group, because the world is much different now than what it was back when I was a young adult. Things are vastly different.
Sure.
So if I can't appreciate that and look at it and then go, okay, so how do we now navigate these doctrinal things and not jeopardize doctrinal truth, yet remain or learn how to be, I should say, more generational sensitive to these upcoming. Is that, I don't know if I'm making sense with this.
No, I think that's a really important point, and that's something that I think we all have to wrestle with to some extent, is differentiating between our preferences and our convictions. And I think there's a tendency that we all have, just because we're inherently somewhat selfish, even if we don't intend to be or want to be, there's that creep that happens where our preferences, we kind of let them drift into areas of conviction without realizing it, to where we're kind of clinging to our convictions, but we don't realize we've also got our arms full of our preferences too.
Right.
And we haven't stepped back and thought, oh, well, actually these things don't belong in my death grip.
Right.
Like these things, yes. The answer is not to let go of, the truth or our convictions of what the gospel, what Scripture teaches us to do as the church. It's not to let go of any of that, and I don't think that would be the opposite of the right answer, right? That's
right.
not the way that we need to move forward and reach the younger. So yeah, I think we can talk about a lot of that disconnect that happens. I think a good example, just to use something practical, I think a lot of times in trying to decide what's preference, what's conviction, what preferences am I perhaps clinging to as if they're matters of conviction when they shouldn't be. An example of that I've seen is the translations we use, the songs that we sing. It's not anything against the translation of the song. It's just when there's Shakespearean English that is embedded into our worship, into our Bible study. It's easy for somebody that grew up in the church that had that normalized to them to maybe have grown into a comfort zone there, but even some of them don't ever do that. Yeah. I saw that firsthand in youth ministry. I'd come into the youth room. This was a long time ago, but come in and the Bibles, the class Bibles are KJV. And so we're passing those out to the students. We're going around reading from the Bible together, and just the barrier that was, to understanding for one thing, but also just, half the kids couldn't read the verse they were assigned without laughing or, just getting distracted by the clunkiness of the language. The same thing happens in singing a lot of times. I know the songs, again, like I grew up singing these songs.
Yeah.
And so I'm used to, I wish I had like a list of some of the, what I hold to be kind of humorous phraseology that's used in some of the songs now that's just so far disconnected from, the way anybody talks anymore. But
like night with ebon pinion brooded o'er the veil.
Yeah, like at some point we have to back up from this and say, okay, let's just suppose that my young adult neighbor agreed to come to worship with me. Mm-hmm. Like, are we going to define terminology and try to teach them 1611 English before they engage in Bible study.
Right.
And I think part of this, to me, it's, I know and love a lot of faithful Christians that do treasure those hymns, those translations, whatever, that I don't, that's great. But in terms of church use, I think it can become a barrier to reaching the next generation. I think there's a reason the Bible was written in Koine, and not classical Greek.
Yeah.
It was the everyday language. It was,
right.
It was trying to be accessible to all people. So we need to do what we can, I think, and that's just one little picture of that. But I think the more that we can move in the direction of the church of being accessible and easily understood by those that are maybe not, aren't in the in terms of understanding that, the more that we can hopefully not alienate some of these, especially younger generations that we're trying to reach.
You've created or painted a very ironic picture because, when I say that the church is vastly aware now of this demographic departing, of not sticking around, and they, the older generation looking at that, realizing that their time is on the back end of, being on this earth, right? So they're they're yearning to make sure that the upcoming group is going to be there to sustain the Lord's church. Okay, so they're keenly interested in retaining that.
Yeah.
Yet they're holding on to these, this extra bias, if you will, not changing doctrinal stuff, but things that don't really matter. Like your example, it's a perfect example of holding on to things that, they take a firm stance on that, say, we're not changing this because this is how it needs to be done. And so that's having an impact on the very thing that they don't want to see, which is to disenfranchise and cause this next generation coming up to sort of shrug off church membership and say, you know what, I don't get it. I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of this because the narrative that's being presented to me is dealing with stuff that really shouldn't matter from a spiritual standpoint.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I do want to be careful. I don't want this to come across like, that the older generations are the bad guys, and that they're like, causing the. I mean, I think I preached on this not too long ago at East Ridge. Some of this I kind of worked into a message, and some of the older generation members were the most affirming of saying, yes,
I've seen that.
This is exactly, we do need to, and some of them were saying that from the angle of, I need to do better. I want to do better. And some of them were saying, this is what I've been saying for a long time, like we want to move in that direction. So, I mean, it's something for all of us to wrestle with, I think. And it's, it's not just, I don't want to single out a certain group and make it sound like I'm, seeing them as the problem or anything like that. It's just, we need to look at this as a church together and say, what can we do better?
Yeah.
What can we, what are our priorities, and how are we going to do things in a way that still hold the convictions 100%, but also are willing to make adjustments where needed that aren't in areas of conviction to be able to be more relevant to the next generation.
Is the church at a place that those conversations can begin happening, do you think? And I'm not talking specifically about our church or East Ridge or any of the, for that matter, any of the local congregations, just, the churchdom, as we address this issue, because when I'm citing statistics and numbers, I'm not necessarily looking at one denomination. I'm looking at, recent, Pew Research and Gallup polls that said, in an 80-year decade trending, church membership, church attendance has fallen below the 50% mark for the first time in 80 years. So these are really concerning statistics that, churches are they're losing their membership. And a lot of the exodus, that membership is coming from the younger generation, that are walking away from this. So you made a point that, the older generation is, for, I think, a lot of good reasons, willing to listen and being very supportive of, hey, we need to be more generationally aware and not be as rigid as maybe the church has been in the past. Again, not compromising, doctrinal truths, but just realigning our thinking to a world that is much, much different than what the world looked like when I was a young adult, or when, this older generation above mine, the baby boomers, were young adults.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is that 50 years from now, the church is going to look, this is my opinion, but I'm trying to speculate here. Mm-hmm. I believe the church will look more different in 50 years if we don't adjust now than it will look if we do adjust now. Because I think if we don't adjust, if we maintain a path where we're losing more and more of this next generation, whatever's left of the church later is gonna reemerge in some form that's probably more foreign to us than making some small adjustments now to the way we do some things. So I think that's kind of some of it's like we just need to be realistic and look at the future and ask what can we do to preserve the church, but also maybe not just to preserve is not a healthy word to use, because it's not just about trying to keep it the way that it is. It's asking what does the faithful church need to look like today? Yeah. And I think in some cases we have some work to do to get there and to be as accessible and relevant and outreach oriented as we need to be in the world to make the kingdom be what it could be. So a lot of this is a very biblical concept, right? It comes down to, is the stronger brother, this is borrowing some Paul language, right? Is the stronger brother willing to let go of some preferentials, right? Some preferences for the sake of the weaker brother. And I think strong and weak sometimes are misleading terminology when we have this conversation, but I think the more mature Christians, that the unfortunate truth is some churches, not all churches, but I think some churches are shedding young adults, and leaderships are, they're making decisions that are leading to young adults being shed in an effort to keep the stronger brothers happy or to keep them in their comfort zone, And to me, that's unfortunate, and it goes against, I think, what Paul's heart and mindset was, and passages like from Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8, where he talks about, sometimes we just need to look at it and say, okay, this might not be my preference. That's okay. I can give up my preference. Yeah. And I think I ran into this one time with, I mentioned songs a while ago. I'll give an example, just a short story about that. One time I was trying to teach a Devo song. This was not at East Ridge, so I can say this. I was trying to teach a Devo song, and it was The Joy of the Lord. And I was teaching the song, and I was leading it each week. I was down to lead singing all month, so I was leading it each week, trying to get the congregation aware of it. And meanwhile, I was singing some other songs. The youth group enjoyed singing at that particular congregation, and I still remember getting pushback. And the pushback was, those Devo songs, especially that one you keep singing every week, like those just need to stay around the campfire, stay at Bible camp or whatever, and we shouldn't be trying to bring those into our worship service. And honestly, in the moment, I wish I had like a well-prepared answer to give in that moment, but instead I was just like, kind of deer in the headlights, just kind of walked away from the conversation like, what?
Yeah.
So then, what I did was the next week I just got up and read the passage in Nehemiah that song's lifted directly from, and said, let's sing scripture together, And I think that's the case with so many of the songs that are maybe not as much, they're not the preference songs. So many of them are straight from Scripture.
Right.
I could lead singing all month and pick every single youth song that's actually Bible verses. I've done that before with leading singing, just like, we're going to sing these Scriptures. There's nothing wrong with obviously there's nothing wrong with the content of the songs. It's just, it's a preference thing. Yeah. So trying to get to a place where we can just help people recognize that this is not a conviction, this is a preference. Right. And that takes leadership. It takes
and outlining what that looks like. Like what when we talk about preference, because I see the immediate pushback from that is going to be, oh, you're trying to change doctrine. You're trying to be liberal minded. You're trying to, and it's not. A very similar situation happened to me, Alan, where I had a member, because I do lead singing, and I've done that for over a decade now, and a member that was pretty upset that I had led a bunch of new Devo songs. Which actually was a balanced mix of traditional songs and then some of the newer songs based in Scripture. And this particular person came up after worship and was very displeased with that, and told me, I needed to stick with the songs that were in the book. 'Cause we use PowerPoint. Some of those are not in the hymnals that we have, the traditional old standard hymnals, and even mentioned, like Amazing Grace. And I told the lady at that point, I said, there was a time when Amazing Grace was a new campfire song. It was a new,
right, yeah.
Every song has its newness, right? And so the new songs today for this current generation, that the songs that resonate with them, that speak to them, will be probably faced with, the generation down the road that look at those as the old-timer songs, right? So each generation has their preference, which I think is the point that you're making here. And we need to, I think if we're going to reach this next generation, we have to shed those kind of things, that type of thinking.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we've gone like completely off script, on this, but I think it's a good conversation. I do want to shift gears
sure.
before we run out of time, and I want to tap into your youth ministry experience, because you spent the majority of your ministry in youth ministry. This was, I'm assuming, high school students, but maybe like pre-high school also. I'm not sure what age range you were dealing with.
Yeah, mainly 7th through 12th. But yeah, I worked with the younger kids too, some, and the teenagers mainly. So
you are probably aware, the statistics are not good. I am the recipient of church youth programs across the country, here at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga, and I see once high school kids graduate, and I'm dealing specifically now with the statistics that I'm talking about are specifically those who have come through a youth ministry program at church. They get to college, and as I'm talking to youth ministers across the country, they're seeing about 2/3 of their youth group leave the church. They don't come back. And very few of those will, in the young adult stages, return to church. So we lose them in college, and they're gone. And they're gone for good. So the statistics are alarming. Yeah. So I want to tap into your experience as a youth minister and just get some feedback there on what you think might be going on with the aspect. Perhaps it starts at home in the youth ministry while they're in college and they're not getting the spiritual roots. I know college, there's variables there. They have that freedom that they've never had before, so they don't have a mom or a dad or a youth minister encouraging them to come to church like they need to come to church, so they're on their own for the first time. So certainly that's an aspect of it. What do you believe youth ministry needs to stop doing, and continue doing to have a kid that comes to college prepared to deal with what they're going to run into in college?
Yeah, that's a lot. I think one of the things that is super important is intergenerational connections, and that starts, from the time a child is young all the way up through church life. But I mean, if they relocate, if they end up at a different church, you lose some of that, but you still have maybe the ability to stay in touch. And the more different age, adults that you have connections with growing up, that's been proven to be one of the major contributors toward a youth remaining faithful in young adulthood. So trying to build that, and I think in youth ministry, there's definitely more. Like when I look back, that's one of the things that, I never will regret efforts that were made in that direction. If anything, I'll regret not doing more, to foster those connections. And in some cases, there's successes and failures. Like you see some kids that do get that kind of web that holds them faithful, and then in some cases that didn't happen. Yeah. I love just getting out, and it's hard to convince teenagers that this is like a good use of a weeknight, but like getting a group of teens together and going and sitting in one of our elderly members' homes and just having life conversation with them, and like having them tell us about how they made it through a health struggle or the loss of their husband or a job loss or something, like hearing them just kind of talk about life and how they relied on their faith through those years, it's like so valuable.
Yeah.
And some of those, they were valuable for me, and I'm having these talks in my 20s and 30s with a lot of these, just listening, and I'm thinking, man, I'm so glad that these teens are hearing this, because this is going to stick with them.
Yeah.
And a lot of my connection at East Ridge, even still today, is there's a lot of people that I got connected with from those conversations that I know better than just about anybody else, because they opened up and they shared all this, and it's people that I wouldn't have gotten to know otherwise, more than likely. I'm kind of in the youth ministry world, and that was where I was kind of interacting with parents and the teens, and that was about it. But trying to branch out of that, and I think in youth ministry you have to kind of make that happen. Like,
right.
It doesn't just, maybe you get some occasional volunteers that are kind of older, wiser, people that step in and get involved, but that's hard to come by. So just taking the initiative to trying to get that interaction formed, trying to encourage some of those people to say, maybe you can adopt this kid and just give them some special attention, and not to be anything too formal, just, make an effort to forge those relationships.
Yeah, what you're saying, it bears out too from my end of it. The kids that stay plugged in, and I talk to a lot of them, and they relay stories just like that, where they have that intergenerational connection during high school, and they tell me their youth minister has been very intentional about that. And I think more youth ministers need to understand the importance, just how valuable that is to foster those types of relationships at their home congregations. So that would, I guess, fall into the category probably of, if you're doing it, continue doing it. If you're not doing it, start doing it, right?
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think? Large picture here, a lot of youth ministries across the nation, and again, we're not just necessarily talking within the churches of Christ, but I'm talking about, just the plethora of youth ministries, because I deal with all sorts of faith backgrounds at the campus ministry level. What do you think most youth programs are getting wrong? Youth ministry programs.
Yeah, compartmentalization. It kind of becomes its own. Sometimes it's not like integrated into the church as a whole. It's just kind of its own thing. And it's a lot of small things that add up on that. I'm kind of big on trying to, with our own kids, like I want church to be something that has a very family dimension to it. I want them to have a youth group to be a part of, but like I feel compelled as a father to be, just as a parent, to be involved in that world, even when I'm not the youth minister, not because of my background, but just because I'm their parent. Like trying to bring family into that kind of intersection, which is hard sometimes to know the right balance on that. But also just in terms of worship, I think it's awesome when the youth want to sit together, but at the same time I'm like, there's a balance here somewhere too, right? Because I want these families, like I want my family to come and worship together. Not just we walk in the door and it's like, hey, I'll see you in a couple hours, and we all split up and do our own thing the whole time. So it's, there's room for both, I think. It's just finding that balance and trying not to look at each other as categories. And I think that applies to youth ministry. It applies to young adult ministry. I think sometimes whenever there's a visitor that comes to the door, instead of looking at this person as, oh, they're a visitor. Oh, wait, they're a teenager. Or, oh, wait, they're a young adult. Like they belong in that group and they'll go over. Instead, it's like, no, they're another soul. Go engage with that person regardless of how much older or younger you might be than them. Like go forge those connections. And so I think trying to get away from that compartmental, every church, like we can drift into these categories where it's like, well, here's the young at heart group, and here's the youth group, and here's the college group, and it's just like we're supposed to be one family. So trying to encourage that is super important. I think one thing on whether it's, I'm kind of applying a lot of the youth ministry principles to young adult work, which is just all I know to do. But like, I think one of the things that helps make that happen is trying to find opportunities, and sometimes you have to be creative to figure those out, but finding opportunities to kind of integrate those kids into bigger church life, more than just, it's great to give a kid an opportunity to, lead a song in the youth Devo or whatever. Like that's awesome. That's a great opportunity. Yeah. But at some point, they need to have not just leadership opportunities, but just service opportunities, whatever it might be teamed up with more than just their youth, their peers, to do service work. Let's team up with, adults of different ages and try to make that happen. One of my favorite things that I've loved seeing, I guess this is kind of moving a little more positive, but I love seeing whenever a young person or a young adult steps up and says, hey, I want to serve on the food line at the church meal. And here they are putting food on the plate of everybody from the 4-year-old to the 94-year-old, and they're smiling, interacting with each person. They kind of get to know people, even just at like surface level, but they're kind of building familiarity, and being seen in that role I think is really valuable. I also love seeing, I've seen this several times at East Ridge lately, and I'm really proud every time I see it, seeing empty nester age, older, couples that their kids are out of the home, and they're going and they're finding young adults, maybe even teenagers, and saying, hey, go eat lunch with us. They're not like part of the youth ministry program or part of the young adult ministry, formally. Like they haven't really, been directly engaged in that, but they're just looking for ways to build those connections, and that goes so far, and it works so much better than somebody from a leadership angle coming in and saying, y'all need to do more of this, more of that. It's just like if it's self-driven, it's so much more genuine, and it happens a lot more fluidly than trying to do the top-down thing.
Yeah, it's way more organic when that happens. Which you've made a couple interesting points that made me think about, especially the compartmentalizing. And we have a tendency to do that because we, as churches, we see the need to have these different groups that function kind of independently, and they have their own special objectives and talents and whatever you want to call it. But that does lead to this propensity to to box those groups up, especially the young, that youth group, and that's really not a biblical concept because we're part of a body, right? So do we view our youth as part of the body, or are they just kind of a side tangent that they'll be part of the body at some point, but not right now, And I think that really does set the stage for exodus out of the church when they get gone, because they never felt plugged in and connected to a church. I mean, surface level, because, they kind of have to go to church because mom and dad make them get up and go. But if they're not part of that body, they've already been amputated, And so when they go to college, why would they feel the need to be part of a church or post-college, So I think you make a really valid point that I believe many churches across our nation, the church leadership and youth ministers need to sit down and have the exact conversation that we're having and understand, from my perspective anyway, when I see them, I see the result of youth programs. I see the good and the bad. And what the comments you've made are spot on, Alan. I mean, these are not made up like theoretical things that you're saying. This is what I've seen over the past decade, and what you're saying works, and it has big implications for the church. And the ones that aren't doing that, we're suffering the consequences of it. So I can't emphasize or underscore what you've just said enough, because it's very relevant to the future of the church and what's taking place right now. What about, one of the things I wanted to ask you too, which comes up quite a bit, I deal with quite a bit, is this mindset of activity-based youth ministry. And I'm not downing. I think there's a place, a big place, for activities and fun and events and that kind of stuff for our youth programs. But is there a balance there? Have we leaned too far on one side or the other of that? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I think we're always trying to find balance. One thing I do think is part of the value of, and this is really broader than youth ministry, but since we're talking youth ministry, the value of like fellowship, fun type interactions in the church and trying to build that closeness. There's one kind of interpretation of that says we're not really accomplishing our mission here, right? Our mission is the Great Commission. We're supposed to be working toward this evangelistic goal, or we need to do more service. Service is what the Lord has called us to in the kingdom, and I think that's all true, and I'm all for trying to do as much as we can to accomplish those aims. But at the same time, maybe we can do a better job of recasting the things that we do plan that are more just fun, fellowship, kind of get together, let's grow in our relationships with each other. Emphasizing our purpose in doing this. It's not just because, hey, it would be really fun to go to Six Flags or whatever we choose to throw on the calendar. The purpose is, as we grow as a church family and grow closer to each other, we become a more powerfully appealing environment for those that we are trying to evangelize to, those we are trying to serve. If you bring somebody in to, worship assembly, and they can tell that nobody there knows each other, really has much relationship with each other, doesn't enjoy being together, they're just all there because they all feel the need to come worship. Yeah. You've kind of lost, even in that, even if you get to that step of evangelism of like getting somebody into the assembly, you lose an evangelistic draw. Yeah. Because you don't have the family connectedness that would ideally be what they walk in and go, wow, this is like a big family. These people know and love each other and spend time together, and they do life together. Be a part of that. Yeah, and I want that. Yeah. If they come in and say, oh, this is like the rest of the world, they just worship God, then we're probably not going to win them to want to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's interesting that when you do the sociology of that, they've done studies on gangs. Primary reason why kids get involved in gangs is to be part of a family. It's not to get rich. Yeah, it's not to they need that. We need that. We're wired that way as human beings. So really good point there. All right, so we're gonna wind this down. I've just got a few more questions. We're gonna switch gears to church leadership because you've worked under church leadership. I'm gonna do my best to get you in trouble right now.
Thanks. Kind of got some good editing over there.
All right. So elderships. Hats off to elderships, just navigating COVID and stuff. I mean, I know we're past that, and I hate to even say that word anymore. But I don't think people really appreciate the stress that elderships were under. Some had to cancel services, some didn't, and where they fell out on that. And then just it seems like the ongoing dynamic of elderships for a lot of congregations. This is coming from students that I talk to. When I ask them about their elderships, they give me all of these things that their elders are doing that honestly are not the job of elders. It's the job of deacons. Yeah. And so I see that over and over and over again, that we have what seems to be, and my representation there, I keep going back to this, but I'm dealing with a wide swath of the southeastern United States. The kids in my ministry represent, a large territory of space. And it seems to be across the board, the common theme is that we've got a lot of deacons in our churches who are deacons in name only. And the elders are the ones that are actually doing the work that the deacons ought to be doing, which means that there's not a whole lot of room or time left for elders to be doing the work of elders, which is, shepherding the flock, focused on spiritual matters and not necessarily, bathroom toilets and, those types of things. Right. So what's your perspective on that? Working, under an eldership, is that something you see as an issue? And if so, what do you think needs to happen?
Yeah. First of all, I have a big heart for elders. My dad's been an elder since 1998. I was 13, and he's still an elder today. He's been at it for 25 years, and so I've seen firsthand, both as a teenager and continuing, that elders put in so much. They lose so much sleep and so many weeknights and everything else just over the work that they've committed themselves to, and I respect that totally, and love them for that. I think a lot of elders, just to, make mention of this, I think a lot of elders would listen to what you just said and said, "You're exactly right." Mm-hmm. I don't think this is like a behind the elder back conversation.
Oh, no, it's a well-known fact.
It's just a struggle. Yeah. And I think a lot of times the things that elders, and I see that in my life too, and I saw that in ministry. A lot of times the things that I knew were the most important were the hardest things to find time to do, or to find energy to do.
Right.
And honestly, sometimes it was more energy than time.
Yeah.
or the heart to do it. Like it's the real work of ministry is it's more demanding than some of the tasks that come along with it. And so sometimes I could distract myself with the tasks and not do the real hard things, and stay really busy and make, feel like I have a pretty good excuse for doing, what I'm doing. Right. And I think so I put myself in the role thinking, okay, if I were an elder, this would probably be a struggle for me too. Yeah. Just to try to imagine that. But yes, I think that what you're saying is absolutely, I've had conversations with people from a lot of different congregations as well, over my entire lifetime, and that's like a recurring, observation. I think it is unfortunate. So one of the problems that I think comes in on this is that elders are expected to be the people that put out fires.
Yep.
And sometimes, if that's their mindset, is we put out fires, and that's what consumes a lot of their time. Oh, this person's upset. We got to meet with this person now tomorrow night. We got to figure out how to fix this situation, and they hurt so and so's feelings. Now we got to have a meeting with these two together. Then we got to meet with each of them individually and see if we can work through this and see if we can get them plugged back into this ministry. And they're doing all this kind of behind the scenes stuff like that, and it's like, okay, are those conversations necessary? Probably a lot of them are. But can we get to a point where church leadership gets so much in a mindset of putting out fires that there's not much proactive leading going on? It's reactionary. It's our job is to take care of problems. Maybe in some cases that is, what falls on them to do. But trying to get to a place where we look at our elders and think more of them as these are people we trust to lead, not just people that we trust to fix broken things. Just getting to a point of proactive leadership is really important. And some of this, I think, just comes down to the way we think of leadership culturally is so much different than the way that church leadership is meant to look. Some men have this boldness to step forward and lead the way, to confidently take charge, and we normally think of them as being leaders, but elderships are it's upside down kingdom leadership, right? Yeah. It's different than that normal picture that's in our mind. You look at 1 Timothy 3, you look at the elder qualifications. An elder is, I'm going to consolidate the list, but a humble, gentle family man. If I'm going to boil it down, a humble, gentle family man, that doesn't sound like a bold leader. Yeah. But that's the kind of leader that the Lord wants for his flock. Yeah. That's the shepherd that he's looking for. Yeah. And it's kind of like the whole choosing David scene all over again, right? Right. I think sometimes we gravitate toward the person that kind of comes across strong as the leadership material. And the Lord's like, I'm looking for the man after my own heart. And so I think as the church, as we seek out potential leadership among ourselves, and just about every church I know of is going through this crisis of we can't find enough elders. Yeah. Men they're not willing to step forward and lead for whatever reasons. So when we think of potential leaders, I think instead of thinking, okay, who are the businessmen that climbed the ladder and proved themselves successful and are wealthy and are the wisest, most, respectable people in that kind of way, and it's like, well, I'm not saying an elder can't be those things, but I don't think that should be our prereqs.
Yeah.
I think we should be looking for maybe even looking at people that didn't climb the ladder and saying, wow, they probably could have, but that wasn't their priority. Yeah. They valued other things that are very important priorities for church leadership, and that's where they've put their emphasis. And looking at those people and seeing potential leaders, I think it's backwards to us some ways, but that's the way the Lord, I think, works, and that's the way the qualifications, I think, too, are laid out. So, but yeah, to your point, I don't think elders should be viewed as glorified deacons. They're the super deacons. They're the ones that, we're super, super active as deacons, and so now we say, all right, you made it, you can be an elder now. Because a lot of times what happens is the ones that are super, they take on all this as a servant, as a deacon. They become an elder and they don't let go.
Right.
Of all those things those kind of things that they've built, so much everybody relies on them to do all these different things. Now they're like, okay, and now I have to do this too, but I just don't know if I have time to. So then they're juggling all these things they shouldn't be juggling. They should be passed on to somebody else. But unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. But yeah, so not super deacons. And what you said about, elders sometimes become deacons. Deacons just don't really know what to do. On the front end of all that, it's kind of like sometimes preachers are hired to do the work of shepherds.
Yep.
That's not getting done by the shepherds because they're doing the work of deacons. And the deacons are like, well, we came to the meeting, what are we supposed to be doing something else? So there's this kind of, everybody's kind of taken a shift to the side, and it's left this vacancy, I think, where preachers are expected to step into the role of shepherd, and that's not the way it should be. And that's not real. I don't really think that's just I don't think it's just one person's fault. I think it's like the whole church. I think there's a mindset shift that needs to happen. And I think as much as in the churches of Christ, we say the preacher is not the pastor, we sure treat him like one sometimes. Yeah. In terms of like, we expect the preacher needs to be the one that comes and prays over me and, is the one that I go to for counsel and like all the stuff that should be. It's like textbook 101. This is what elders do. Mm-hmm. A lot of times the people, just coming from the pews, it's like the expectation is I want the preacher to be my pastor.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to wrap this up, but you've hit on some topics that are just near and dear to my heart that I've seen. I've written about this very issue. That it's what I see and have seen over the last however long I've been in church. It's been decades. It's the memberships that are creating this issue for our elders. We see the businessman that has climbed the ladder. He's successful. He manages finances well, and we automatically assume what a great leader. He needs to be an elder, and so we push this person to be an elder, and they're obviously bringing their skill set into what they're good at, which opens up this this whole what's the word I'm looking for? This paradigm, I guess, and that just kind of gets re-sucked into the membership, and they look at that and they go, okay, yeah, that's what's supposed to be happening, and look at all the great physical things that our eldership has done for the building and stuff, and so that's what a good eldership looks like. And meanwhile, the deacons are, they're sitting here, well, what do we do? And so that creates that dynamic, and it all gets exacerbated by the constant approval, I guess, the check marks of the membership. You threw in the preacher there, and it's like, okay, and so this is what our preacher does, which is also stealing some of the roles of eldership. So we've got just really a strange kind of thing that does not match Scripture like I read Scripture. And maybe I'm completely off base here, but when I read about the roles of an elder and what a preacher is going to be doing and the work of the deacons, I see a picture that looks really different than most churches, their leadership structure that I see today. And I think that's contributing to a lot of brokenness in the church. And so I guess all of that to say, what do we do to fix it? Is it an education piece? Should the preacher be up there re-educating the church membership on, as a church membership, you have the responsibility to be going and looking to the needs of your fellow brothers and sisters. And the elders should be praying and focused on the spiritual dimension and helping to teach. And the deacons, they're the kind of the hands-on guys, right? So, is it an educational piece that memberships need to be okay with receiving that and maybe changing their stance on it? Is it the elderships that need to be stepping up and saying, hey, enough is enough? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, collective effort. I think everybody has to kind of recognize what they contribute to the problem. So, for the person in the pew that's just, not plugged into leadership in any way, go encourage that spirit, the person that you see spiritual leadership potential in that might not be, the normally looked to person. Go encourage them toward that, and kind of, they're in the same way. Look to your elders, go to your elders for prayer and counsel.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to cut off or suggest that congregations should be cut off from their minister if they can't, but at the same time, I think most preachers are happy to see their, the members of the congregation they serve rely on their elders for that support and counsel. And a lot of times preachers are going to the elders going, help me handle this situation anyway, right? They're looking for that kind of teamwork support to give counsel. And I think a lot of times it's almost dangerous. And I think that's the wisdom of elderships, being a plurality of like a group. We help each other see blind spots, and, we have collective wisdom that's better than what maybe any one of us would come up with individually. And so a lot of times when a preacher is relied on to handle a situation an eldership needs to handle, it puts them up against a pretty tough task.
Yeah.
And it's almost dangerous to even try to go there without bringing the eldership into it,
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think if you're a deacon, I think going to that elder that you see is doing something that a deacon should be doing and saying, hey, can I take this off your hands?
Yeah.
Could this be delegated to, this person's really good at doing that. Could they do that? Because I want you to be as free to do what, you really need to be doing. Trying to do what you can from that angle would be, I would think it would be very encouraging to an elder who's overburdened with these tasks that are outside of the purview of, shepherding, to have that kind of offer. Maybe the preacher has a role to play in that educationally, and maybe just sometimes redirecting people, or being kind of the middleman between the elders and the person that has a need, trying to connect them with the eldership. But as far as the elders' role in all that, I think it's going to take some intentional leadership to really see a change come to fruition, I think. And I think this is just a conversation that maybe some elderships can have, is just to say, okay, here's the need we perceive. What do we want this eldership to look like and to occupy itself with? Like, what's going to be our chief aim? And then making practical steps to work in that direction. And I think some of the crisis that so many churches are having to give elders to step forward, it's that they might be willing to serve as deacons, but they don't want to be super deacons.
Yeah.
They'll take on a few things. They don't want to be more committed than they were as a deacon. But it's like, these are two different categories. Like, eldership it's not like you become a deacon and then if you prereq from that up to elder. It's a whole different contribution that you're making toward the church. And so trying to redefine, this is what it looks like to be an elder. You're a spiritual shepherd, you're a nurturer, you're somebody that's encouraging and helping teach, and trying to help people through difficult times, doing all that kind of thing. Like, that's something that elders can perhaps do more to redefine. And then maybe there will be people that are unwilling to be super deacons,
become elders,
that would be really good at being elders,
right.
you know? And so maybe if they can see that and believe that, oh, this is what I'm considering.
Yeah.
I can relate with people. I can have these, I would love to have one-on-one conversations and studies with people, and try to encourage people, and have these important, interactions with people as a group of men that are offering counsel. And if they see it as this kind of more the spirit, the real dimension biblically of what an eldership should be doing, the more that they see that modeled and displayed, then maybe we'll see new men step forward that we didn't think of before, that are saying, I can do that. Yeah. That's something that's appealing to me. I'm not a board member. I'm not that kind of person. I don't have that skill set, but I can be a spiritual encourager.
I think, there's some really great resources out there that deal with this specifically, how to break this cycle. I don't know if we have the capability to put the links on our stuff. Parker's our producer of the show, and that may be something we want to do, because I think this is just vastly important. I think this is the game changer that changes the trajectory of the course in a lot of different ways. And we've talked about a lot of different stuff today, but I think this particular topic, when we're talking about the structure of the church, a lot of these things begin to get fixed, other things that we've talked about, when we have the Lord's structure of how he wanted his church to be operating and who was supposed to be doing what. I bring a business background prior to ministry, and I see, the importance of having the leadership structure functioning and doing what it's supposed to do. All the other little stuff that you wouldn't think are connected, get connected to it. So, man, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are out of time.
Yeah, it happens.
Yep. So
it happened at Lowe's too. You
know. I know. Yeah, we could just keep talking on this stuff. But Alan, I'm going to give you first of all, thank you for joining the show today. I really appreciate it. Glad we were able to circle back with each other. May want to have you back on the show at some point. I'm gonna give you the final thoughts. But before we do that, just again encouraging those that are listening. If you like what you hear. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's the visual piece of this. If you want to sponsor this show, there's opportunity to do that. This particular episode is sponsored by Central Church of Christ here in Chattanooga. I would love to have you come worship with us and check us out. And Alan, close out with a couple verses for our final thoughts, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I was thinking about my favorite scriptures and how they're kind of encouraging toward, as I just kind of back up from life and look at it, think about the past, what I'm called out of, think about the present, how I deal with the present, and also the hope that lays ahead of us in the future. Verses that I love, Micah chapter 6, verse 8. I have these words are on our kitchen wall at home: seek justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. It's just a very profound, but also simple and easy to remember. Kind of this focus point for us. We're called out of injustice. We're called out of judgmentalism, and we're called out of pride. We're called out of these things, and the Lord's set before us these standards. And as we try to bring those into life, though, and we try to deal with circumstances we come to. Another verse I really love, Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love the Lord. And I just think of how in the present sometimes, even though we have these ideals of justice and mercy and walking humbly with God, sometimes in the present it's hard to interpret things that are happening and challenges we're going through, circumstances that arise. So just having that mindset and how we process life, of knowing that all things work together for good. And then earlier in that same chapter, Romans 8, verse 21, I love this is what we long for. This is what we live into. It's what keeps us motivated and excited. Creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And if that verse doesn't make you excited, it doesn't give you something to latch on to and stay focused on, and just to give you hope going through life and trying to bring about those purposes that the Lord has set before us, to seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with Him. That's when we know where we're headed. It gives us that motivation to see the course.
Absolutely. Great thoughts. Until our next episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, love one another, be kind to one another. Remember, the creator of this universe loves you so much that He gave up His only Son for you. Have a blessed day, everybody.